Good morning and welcome to MaRS. I'm Mark Zimmerman. I'm part of the Information Communications and Entertainment practice here at MaRS, which we affectionately call ICE. One of the areas that we spend a fair amount of time working with companies on is in the software as a service arena, in the sort of broadly writ transformation of software from something that you buy and install on a server in a data center somewhere to something that you rent over the cloud. And that's one of the elements that has driven the transformation of IT, the consumerization of IT. As part of this process, this event that we're holding today is part of our Market Insights series, and we generally do those in kind of two parts. There's a discussion, a panel, an event like this, and a paper that goes along with it. And our market intelligence team, led by Neha on this topic, has done a fantastic job at looking at 8 Ontario startups that exemplify these trends, that exemplify the trends that we're going to talk about this morning, the consumerization of IT trends. So 8 companies that are leading this charge here in the province, and we encourage you to go to marsdd.com/reports and check out that report. Not only is the report fantastic and full of some great insights, but you can see there the illustrations at the very least will give you a chuckle. We've done caricatures of all of the startup founders that are in there. So if you recognize any of those folks, David here from Ripple will recognize the team from his firm who are caricatured up there. So I think you'll get a kick out of those. So please do take a look at that. This morning we're going to do kind of a two-part process here. I'm going to invite some of the panelists up. They are going to give a 10-minute presentation thereabouts, some of their thoughts about this topic, some of their insights as to how things are changing here. Then we'll sit back down and we'll have a more informal Q&A. I've got a half a dozen questions for them, but we will also welcome questions from the floor from each of you to ask them questions. And I think you'll be impressed with the variety of viewpoints that they bring. We were very careful in selecting our panelists to try to present a 360-degree view of this topic. We've got folks from the IT industry, sort of practitioners of the IT profession in the in the CIO kind of role in that from that perspective. Folks who are actively engaged in the startup process, who are building companies that are capitalizing on this consumerization trend. Analysts from IDC to give you sort of the big picture, the broad strokes of what's going on both in Canada and globally, sort of the underlying themes that are driving these trends, and venture capitalists to talk about where he's voting with his wallet on these trends and how that unfolds. So I think we'll have a very interesting perspective presented for you about this very fascinating topic. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a couple of thoughts myself about, having spent now 20 years, coming on 20 years in the IT business. The first 10 of them were sort of more of the same. Everything got faster and smaller and cheaper, but the trend lines were largely the same. It went out of the big iron into smaller hardware, smaller computers. The networks got faster. The widgets connected to them got cheaper, and so on. And call it 10 years ago, with sort of the emergence of Salesforce.com and that sort of trend, we flipped the world upside down, or we began the process of flipping the world upside down. The CEO wasn't sort of driving the IT decision anymore. The business user was driving that IT decision. The business user actually finally knew enough to have a conversation with the CIO about this stuff and learned that things weren't necessarily unfolding the way they wanted them to. So we sort of began to see the consumer, or the end user in the space, begin to exert more and more power. And that trend is now largely complete. We've sort of flipped the whole IT buying paradigm, the whole IT design paradigm upside down, and it's the end users, it's the business user who is driving this, and I think that's a fascinating shift, both as a user of that technology, but also as a person in that industry, a watcher of that industry. It's a tremendous opportunity for startups and for innovations to really accelerate. When you start to have not one person sort of leading that innovative charge, but now hundreds of people driving that innovation in a company, your pace of innovation can really, really accelerate. And that's something that we're pretty excited about here at MaRS. We are going to take you through to about 9:30 in terms of our agenda. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker and bring him up to the podium to give you 10 minutes of context, and then we'll bring up all of our subsequent folks as we go. So our first person who's going to give you a little context here is Nigel Wallace. He's a research director at IDC, focused on the B2B space and application software in that related space. He covers enterprise applications from the heavy lifting things, the ERPs, the CRMs, the supply chain management applications, and also the emerging consumer entrance into that space. He's also part of IDC's global sourcing team, so he has a few things to say about offshore and onshoring and in the cloud and all of the sort of the larger trends that are driving changes in how we spend our IT dollars. So without further ado, let me give you Nigel Wallace as our first presenter.
Just want to thank Mark for the flattering introduction. One of the things that IDC tends to do is definitions, taxonomy, as well as data. It is the middle name of the company, International Data Corporation. So, to set up a definition here, there isn't a formal one. A number of different analyst firms have tried, but the idea that technology is now emerging first in the consumer market and spreading into business organizations, whether it's cloud computing, whether it happens to be social business, whether it happens to be mobile devices and whatnot. The interesting thing about this is that each one of these has different consequences for both vendors and actually also the providers of IT and the CIOs who are trying to control what companies are actually doing in their IT selection. If we think about it though, one of the things that comes up is that there's a sort of a straw man about enterprise IT, how it's monolithic, how it's rigid. And in some ways, we actually have a lot to be grateful for enterprise IT. It removed us from being in a world like this, where we're actually pushing real tons of paper. You look back to the big revolutions of what actually happened in terms of the workforce, and that's our computing division that allowed for these big monolithic IT things along the lines of social insurance in the US, the healthcare system and whatnot. But when we think about it, we don't work in this environment anymore. We don't necessarily show up to the factory. And to give some Canadian flavor to that, we actually went through and tried to map out what Canada's workforce is now doing. Where does Canada's workforce actually work? And so if we look to the audience's far right here, the non-mobile worker, those are people who are in factories, who are sitting at a desk in Cubicleville, they're coming in for the 37.5 hours a week. That's what the enterprise IT, the systems of record that we've designed over the years, the client-server years, is really designed for. And you can see that is an ever-slipping part of the population, driven by secular trends like the decline of manufacturing over time and the outsourcing of that industry, and driven by the fact that now people can be more mobile and have opted to be more mobile. So when you look at things like office-based mobile worker, that's looking at people who happen to have a desk or a cubicle or show up and use that sign in, sign out, but also are on the road with clients, visiting people, sales forces and whatnot. Non-office-based mobile workers, you're looking at your field force, you're looking at all sorts of people there, doctors, and people with those particular businesses might have slightly different needs from their IT. When we look at that, what do? They opt for smartphones. And so this is actually Canadian statistics about the install base by handset. We're looking here, the little blue line I inserted on the chart, that's actually Canada's population. So we're not quite yet at 100%. When we look at this in terms of has the install base hit, like in Italy where it's more than 100%, where the average person actually is now somewhere around 1.3 phones per person. But we're getting there. And you can see the feature phone, the basic cell phone that we all started with, the Motorola Razr, for instance, those types of things, they're a dying beast. What we're looking for now is the smartphone, or depending on your branding, you could call it the superphone, depending on what feature it requires to be a superphone. But that's what people want now. They want the ubiquitous ability to hit broadband, they want the ability to use data, they want the ability to do more than that. And so we also see more devices, the device proliferation, and people want to choose their own device. But if you're choosing your own device, does it actually work with your own enterprise IT if you work for a large organization. And this is one of the things that I find really interesting. Again, another Canadian stat. This isn't a North American one, this is specific to Canada. Is that when we look about this is the giant firewall for BlackBerry. You look at, in Canada, Canadian organizations, roughly 81% of them support the BlackBerry at an enterprise level. If it's your own personal BlackBerry, it's almost 40%. Now the problem is the brand message there being 100% reliability kind of called into question recently. And that's one of the interesting openings for things like the iPad. So already a quarter of Canadian organizations are supporting the iPad at a corporate level. It's not the personal level, but you can see it's not far behind. And that's one of the things that's opening up this proliferation of devices. It's not monolithic. It's not a standardization. Everybody is going to be on one device, and that device is the legacy device that we've already had. We're now willing to think about how are we going to engage with whatever our employees, our lines of business are wanting to offer to themselves. And as a CIO, it's a big challenge. It's much easier to use the Henry Ford. You can have whatever color you want as long as it's black. It's not as easy to be in this world where some people want the playbook, some people want an iPad, and you have to be able to deliver to anybody. And that leads to my next point, and again, another Canadian slide. We talked to a whole bunch of, I think it was 100 line of business respondents and 100 IT respondents. And one of the things that came up was this dissatisfaction between what they're offering and how can they improve. So when we look at the IT people, one thing that they really think would allow them to improve is if they could just do what they want to do, focus on their job. And the problem is that's not how it's going to work. It's kind of an ostrich approach. Their head is in the sand here. Because if you look at what the line of business, what their champions internally, what their internal customers are saying, it's that they need to provide up-to-date technology. It's that they need to be easy to work with. Standing off by yourself and doing your own thing is not that. And so one of the things we look at is that business will go off and achieve its own goals without IT if it needs to. It can do that now. And that's one of the things with the consumerization of IT. Much like when you're on your own, buying your own tools for your own needs, you can achieve your own goals by picking the iPad or picking what email server to work with. Nowadays, if you're and VP sales, VP marketing, you can opt to cloud, move to the cloud much more efficiently than you could have, say, 10 years ago. And so this doesn't look like much, the blue space at the bottom here. It really, you look at the total spend here, sitting around $8 billion Canadian, growing to about $11 billion over the time period. The difference being, look at the compound annual growth rate. We're looking at 3% for traditional license and maintenance, whereas cloud-based software is growing at over 20% compound annual growth rate. And that takes into account things like maintenance. You are going to keep paying maintenance to Oracle for running their databases, even as you move to the cloud. And so the fact that that spend is still existing, but cloud is growing at an over 20% clip in Canada is impressive. When we look into the States, it's growing slightly faster in the short run, and we will catch up. So that's a big factor if you're the CIO as well. How do you cope with lines of business going off and wanting to procure their own IT? And so the other area that there's a dissatisfaction of is IT locking down social networks. On your own time, social, the ability to reach out and connect is a huge deal. Companies in Canada, not so much necessarily. So you look at your personal life and you've got all these options for how you want to connect, how you want to collaborate, how you want to interact with your friends, your acquaintances, your past, your businesses. And then you get into the workforce and you've got different options. But are Canadian companies actually engaging with these social technologies? It's a mixed bag, because here's some more Canadian data from, I think this is from early this year, sometime around May, when we went to field and we surveyed somewhere around 300 Canadian companies on this. And you can see only 45% of Canadian companies are actually on public social networking sites, such as Facebook. If you're looking at microblogging, Twitter being the Uber example of this, you're looking again, just around 30%. So there's this lack of engagement by Canadian companies in terms of getting into what their employees are already on. Because you're looking at the total market here for Facebook, roughly around 50 million active users in Canada. So it's a big market. It's one that will matter. I mean, you can look at Salesforce buying Radian there for hundreds of millions of dollars. But our Canadian organizations and the IT organizations that support the systems of record, moving to be able to support the systems of engagement, they're not there yet. And that leads to this frustration that we're talking about. Well, one of the reasons in defense of the CIO, the poor, beleaguered CIO, is that it's really easy, if you're a consumer, to go through your legacy and just dispose of it. Throw out your CDs, get rid of your tape, move through your different ways of communicating and collaborating. That's pretty straightforward, because you don't actually have to care about regulations. You don't have to care about governance and all these other issues. You just have to find a legal way to dispose of all those old CDs. And so when you think about it, unfortunately, it's not quite the same when you start looking at actual corporate IT. It takes a long time. There's a lot of effort. You need to bring in these stakeholders, and it costs a lot of money. So it's going to be a slow pattern of change, but we can see the ripple effect all over places. No, not meaning to jump on your bandwagon, but actually it's not a bad segue in a second. So the upgrade, personal upgrade again, we actually have new ways of upgrading personal technology. You look at the spend here, $12 billion in mobile app stores, a technology that didn't exist 6 years ago. But again, that's primarily consumer or personal technology. So in terms of your corporate IT architecture, are you likely to be able to create your own app store so that lines of businesses or senior executives can choose to opt to personalize what apps they need to download from their own IT purveyance? You look at the iTunes, moving from iTunes to App Store, same thing. If they can get that on the weekend for their own technologies, their expectations get ever higher for your corporate technologies. And CIOs aren't totally in denial. We did a quick survey of them to say, like, what are you spending on maintenance and support? And it works out to about 75% of their budget. They're aware of that. They'd like to move to 60%. They'd like to get 40% innovation. Sadly, that's going to be an uphill battle when you think about that look on the cloud, where cloud's migrating to about, over the 2015 time period, we're expecting to be about 8% of the software market in total. So that's an uphill climb. There's a lot invested in legacy technologies. But lines of business will be driving it over this time to try and move towards getting innovation. And so our advice to the vendors, there's lots of different ways to get into enterprise. One of the easiest ways, though, is to find your champion. And that champion's probably in a department. It may not actually be the IT. So if you can follow your champions, that's great. The other thing is, consumerization is awesome for the user interface and all these other areas, but you do need to play nice with the CIO. So bring to bear the enterprise-grade security, the low training requirements, be able to integrate with their other components in their stack so that they can have a single view of their customer. That's one of their corporate priorities. It's a really useful idea. But from the point of view of the CIO, when you're looking at the CIO, this is somewhat inevitable. And going back to the we'd like to spend time by ourselves approach on the earlier slide, if you're not embracing bring your own device, if you're not embracing the consumerization of enterprise, you're going to be seen as the guy at the table who always says no. That's going to be the CIO's role if you're not willing to embrace this proactively. So I think, and IDC's view on this is it's incumbent to start support BYOD now. The other thing is you need to start preparing for bring your own app. It won't be enough to just be able to support an iPad or a playbook. It will be that different components of the business are looking for different layers of apps and being able to provision that faster, ever faster. And that speaks to what are you actually benchmarking? Total cost? Is that really what you're benchmarking? Or is it response time? Is it time to value? When we want to launch a new solution, a new business change, can we actually be faster or as fast as the cloud? And if you look back at historically, probably not. So that's a critical issue for CIOs to think about, is how do we actually benchmark ourselves on things that really matter and stop being the guy who says no. And I think consumerization of enterprise IT is an easy way for CIOs to start thinking about how to bridge those solitudes. And with that, we can move on to David.
Thanks, Nigel. I think that gave us some great context and some terminology and some framework in which to have the discussion that will follow. I'm going to bring up now David Premier, who is the VP Sales at Ripple. Ripple is one of the startups that is profiled in our SASE Enterprise piece, is one of the startups locally that is leading this trend and is a key mover on a couple of the areas that Nigel mentioned, the consumer interface, the bringing in of social into the enterprise. David is an interesting fellow from a sales role. He's a scientist turned serial entrepreneur. When I read his degree in chemistry and atmospheric science, the first thing I said, okay, failed weatherman perhaps on the way to being a director of sales. He ran sales at Vericent, another local success story, and also at WorkBrain, two great startups. So without further ado, let me give you David Premier, who will talk to you about how Ripple is capitalizing on these trends.
All right. All right, we're good. Yeah, so it's funny, at university there were two of us in our program. The other guy actually did go on to become a weatherman. He actually did graduate work at Michigan University. Now his name is Chris Scott. He's on the Weather Network. He's actually one of the kind of the on-air personalities and meteorologists there. So you're totally right. All right, so thank you everyone today. What I'm going to do is just give you a bit of an overview of Ripple. Like it'll just be a little bit of a case study. Take a slightly different kind of, more kind of a real-life operationalizing, some of the concepts that Nigel talked about approach. So talked a bit about, the problem that we solve and how we went about solving it and kind of how that's being addressed by kind of the corporation. And then just kind of take a step back and talk about some of the challenges that we've had and some of the ways we've overcome them. So just by a little bit of history, a lot of the kind of the impetus and motivation for Ripple came back, as Mark said, in the WorkBrain days. And so think about WorkBrain as a company. So we started, a small company and grew to 700 people over the course of maybe 5 years or so. And so, there's really two kind of, main things that we saw. Number one, we were all really focused on achieving business results. So we're just heads down. We had this huge kind of incumbent 400-pound gorilla in our space we were trying to beat. We were just all very focused on achieving that result. The second thing that happened was because we were growing so quickly, we ended up promoting a lot of people, like myself, into manager roles when they were in their 20s. And so what happened was this kind of problem emerged. Number one, because we were so focused on achieving our results, we didn't have time to stop and think and talk to each other and tell each other what we needed to do to kind of get better. And a lot of that kind of stuff happened organically, but as kind of Gen Ys at the time, people in our 20s and people who wanting to get better at our jobs, the challenge was we didn't really get that ongoing feedback that we needed. The other challenge was that as new managers, we didn't know what the heck we were supposed to do. No one sat us down and said, hey, as a manager, what's really good? You should meet with your people once a week and talk about these kind of things, and when they do something great, this is the way you should, no one told us that, right? So fast forward many years later, and we got the band back together and we're starting Ripple. And so the problem that we're looking to solve was this problem. Let's just help people. Forget the company. Let's help people get the feedback they need to develop personally and professionally. And as managers who are tasked with hitting a number or achieving a result, let's help them get the most out of their teams and deliver those business results. That was the thing that we started doing. And it helps when you're launching a new software product, especially in a company, to pick an enemy. And so the enemy that we picked was the annual performance review. So we actually didn't really have much of this in the WorkBrain days, but for a lot of companies, this is the solution that they have, right? We want to help you get better, we want to help you improve. So we have this thing called the annual performance review, and that's the thing that's going to help solve that problem. Well, the good news for us is that people hate reviews, right? People actually, 75% of people use the word hate to describe their feeling about performance reviews. And more so than that, forget that process itself. People actually want to hear from their management and their peers quite often, right? And this wasn't a corporate problem. This was a people problem. And the problem was, corporations weren't as interested at the time in solving this problem, right? So a lot of academics, a lot of thought leaders were kind of talking about this type of thing, but a lot of corporations were not saying, hey, how do we get rid of the performance review and how do we help people get more feedback? So our approach was to say, well, hold on a second. What if we could take performance feedback and make it these three things? And it's funny, being easy and social and engaging are terms that you could apply to a variety of tools. You could apply that to Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. People use things because they integrate with the things they do already. They get to do it, as a cohort, and they actually want to do it, right? When people bring their iPhones and iPads and Android devices to work, it's not because someone told them to. It's because they want to. So how do we kind of solve this problem? And the idea, and just kind of from a business perspective of Ripple, was to say if we can actually get people doing this, forget the companies, if we can get people doing this within a company, forget what their IT department says, then sooner or later the company's going to have to pay for this, right? They're going to need our enterprise features. They're going to need to kind of lock this down and enforce security and have reports and all these kind of things. Well, so what happened was that companies actually started embracing this sooner. All of the kind of the talk and all of the chatter around feedback and performance and people bringing their own tools to work caught up much faster than we thought. And so we started seeing a lot of companies start embracing this technology sooner and saying, well, you know what, you're right. When we stood up at the HR Technology Conference a couple years ago in Chicago, and we were giving a keynote to 2,000 people, and the first slide was that it said performance reviews suck. And this is to 2,000 HR professionals. There was this kind of knowing laughter in the room. And that was the idea. People are starting to come around to the idea that doing something that does not jive with the way their people think and work is a bad idea. And so over the course of time, we've morphed, right? So this is just kind of a snippet of kind of how we position ourselves now. It's not feedback and coaching at kind of the individual level. It's social performance management. And we've done this by essentially to take a concept that people are familiar with in a company, right? We know what performance management is. That's when we sit down once or twice a year and write essays on each other, right? This is the different way of doing it. This is social performance management. It's solving the same problem in a new way. So that's kind of just a bit of a snippet on Ripple and kind of where we are and what we do. So what's the problem? Why is this always kind of a tough slog? Well, the first reason is it just simply inertia. People do what they've always done, especially in big companies. It's kind of like I'm driving in my car and my kids are yakking in the back. And I'm just going to ignore them until I can't anymore, right? Until I snap. And what's happening is that a lot of companies are snapping. They're realizing that turnover is very high, that they're having all sorts of challenges. We did this organizational health survey, and lo and behold, people hate what we're doing. So they're being forced to change. But inertia is a huge, never underestimate the power of inertia. The second thing is awareness. We just don't know that other options exist. I kind of call this problem, we have this saying, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? So the challenge is that we have this problem called performance and feedback and coaching and all this kind of stuff, but we have this solution called the review, and let's just make that better. We just keep iterating on that and everything will be okay. And so knowing that there's something outside of the realm that people can use is certainly a challenge. And then the last thing is fear. I mean, fear, we shouldn't be surprised. When email first came out, the reaction was, oh my gosh, people can say whatever they want and send messages to each other. We got to lock this down. And you see the same thing now with social media. People have social media policies, and we can't let them use Facebook, and we can't do all these things. It's because people are unwilling to, we kind of say, optimize for lack of control. What happens when we just let people say whatever they want? And I'll tell you, in our business, when I speak to certain prospects, I'll get a lot of fear-based objections. They'll say, well, hold on a second. I can go onto your service, and I can do A, B, and C. Couldn't I just do this horrendous thing? And the answer is, you absolutely can, right? So you have to be able to optimize for this lack of control. So those are kind of the three barriers. So it's not all bad news. So the good news is there's things that you can do and that we do to help remove these barriers. So the first thing is generate remarkable content. And what I mean by this is unless you're Oprah or you're Mark Zuckerberg, no one cares what you say, right? These people can kind of get up and say things, and people will kind of snap into action. In reality, especially when you're starting a business and it's a new and interesting idea, you have not a ton of credibility, but other people do. Thought leaders, authors, and what you need to do is generate as much content as you can about what you're trying to do in your space. So one of the things that we do is we do a ton of blogging, not about our product or our service, but about our space, about the challenges, the problems we solve, the things that companies are doing kind of around our space. We actually had a seminar series called Epic Leadership Tips that we still run, where every couple weeks we have a new speaker come and talk about their thought leaders in coaching or executive management. They're academics. They talk about their research, their work. Has nothing to do with our service. We simply host them, and of course it's in our sphere, but it gets people talking about our space and our products. So I would say that's number one tip. The second thing is simply to iterate, right? Listen and improve quickly. And what's interesting is in a kind of a social software or even freemium space that we're in, your product has to be good. If people can pick up your product and use it for free, they will quickly decide on their own if it's for them, and you don't have the luxury of putting a salesperson in front of them to help kind of pitch it. So in order to get the best product you can, you need to move really, really fast. It's actually the same principle that we apply to getting feedback, you apply to your product. product. It doesn't help me to get feedback once at the end of the year and someone tells me all these things I could have, should have, would have done. Tell me right now. And so to the extent we can get real-time feedback and iterate and build our product quickly, it's going to help us get better quickly. And kind of there's a saying that we have, which is, listen like you don't know what you're doing, and build like you're the master of the universe, right? So it's kind of a dichotomy there. So number 2, iterate. And then lastly, focus on your target customer. And this kind of, this is not rocket science, and the way I describe this this tip is kind of like I call it the Simpsons problem. So who here watches the Simpsons? There's enough. All right. You guys in the back in the suits, you probably watch, but you're too afraid to put your hand up. But the idea, so in The Simpsons, there was an episode with the monorail. I don't know if you guys remember the monorail episode, right? And so this monorail salesman comes to Springfield and says, I got this, bona fide electrified 6-car monorail. Like, it's this big, flashy new idea. And what was the reaction of the people of Springfield? Like, oh, this sounds, I don't know if this is, this is for us. It sounds expensive. They had all these objections. So what does the salesperson say? He says, you know what, you're right. This sounds more like a Shelbyville idea. Right? Shelbyville is kind of the rival city to Springfield. And the reality is that Ripple is a Shelbyville idea. So, for us to go and start focusing on the Springfields is probably not, where we want to be. So, when you create a solution, right, we have a solution like Ripple. Can Ripple be used by any company in the world? It absolutely can. Does every company in the world have the kind of the wherewithal and the culture for it to take off? Absolutely not. So the idea of focusing, by definition, you have a product and you say, well, it's applicable to everyone, but by definition, there is some kind of target niche, and maybe it's temporal, maybe like Twitter or Facebook, maybe it's the early majority at some point in time, but then it shifts kind of the late majority. You have to know who you're selling to, and then what happens is your marketing, your product becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we build our software for companies in our target space, which are kind of 0 to 1,000 to maybe up to 3,000 kind of employees. We have customers that are bigger than that, but most of our customers are smaller than that. They're typically kind of forward-thinking, tech, creative, marketing, digital media type of agencies. We have banks, right? We have consulting firms. We have those too, but we focus on our core market. And when you focus on your core market, you're going to develop a product, marketing, and ecosystem that's very much geared towards what you're trying to do. And they'll help you make your product better. So that's all I had. That's kind of my tips, a little bit of case study on Ripple and what we've done. Great.
Thanks, David, for giving us a little bit of context about how you're working around these trends. Which ones are your friends? Which ones you need to adapt to in the marketplace. Dennis Young is someone who's spent his whole career thinking about those adapting to the marketplace and adapting IT to the enterprise. He's spent 27 years with various major consulting firms, mostly in the healthcare vertical, a vertical that is seeing a huge amount of this consumerization, sort of what I would think of as has been an IT backwater for a long time, the healthcare space. Working here at MaRS, you watch the folks in scrubs come into the food court from the hospital, that's attached to the building, and there's been in the last year just a complete transformation of those folks. They all used to carry clipboards when they came in to here to grab a sandwich, and they're now all carrying iPads. It's been just a phenomenal thing to watch. Sort of my personal data point, rather than Nigel's graph about here's the introduction of the feature phone and so on, has been, okay, what percentage when I'm having a sub have an iPad in their hand? And I think we're getting about 70% doctors now are carrying something of that nature around. And so Dennis is from a company called T4G that helps enterprises capitalize on those trends, an IT consulting and services firm, and he'll give us the perspective of the CIO and of the folks who advise those CIOs on how to take advantage of these technologies. So I'll give you Dennis Young.
Good morning. I have one of the most challenging jobs, I think, here today. That is to be the voice of the corporate CIO, somebody who's fast becoming a sort of lonely person in the world of change. Let me recount the CIO for Unilever, a major European food services giant. and his reaction to the latest round of young employees coming to the workforce. They take a look at their corporate apps and they scream in horror. Even more horrified after their first day, when they've been inducted to all the processes, procedures, policies, application no-nos, things that you're not allowed to do. Like Unilever, many big corporations today are recruiting from a generation who've grown up with technology. Xbox, Facebook, Twitter, smartphones, apps. My 12-year-old daughter can talk about cloud in a whole new way, and she's not talking about white fluffy stuff anymore. These young people want what they have at home, what they can buy for $100, $200, $300. And might I say, some very busy executives are asking for the same thing. Picture, if you will, an emergency room in a busy hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a quiet time, the doctors are chatting, and all of a sudden an alert goes off. A patient's coming in with head trauma. Now at 3 o'clock in the morning in a busy hospital, that doctor is not going to get access to a medical record if that patient is from another jurisdiction, another city, or another province. So while the patient's being prepped, the doctor fires up his app. Within minutes is talking to colleagues about how to treat that patient based on how that patient has presented himself. And this is going on more and more, and dare I say, more often than not in busy hospitals today. In the early days of computing, and some of us might remember those days, technology was invented in the enterprise and slowly but surely found its way into the consumer's hands. I was around in 1981 when the PC was first deployed into a major corporation. Today, consumerism is inventing technology, and it's slowly making its way up into the enterprise. Economies of scale today are so profound that they are tilting our decision-making towards the consumer world. As Nigel said in his introductory remarks, there are over 5 billion cell phones in use today, and the rate of addition is over 1.5 billion units a year. Other consumer technologies like Facebook, Skype, and dare I say, email is dead phenomenon, are profoundly affecting what a CIO is having to deal with on any given day. Today's generation are loath to accept the kind of constraints that we have in our business world. If I can't get an instantaneous update to my technology like I can get from Google or any of the other cloud-based services, then I'm not happy as an employee. My home computer that I just paid $399 for has the latest and greatest tools and techniques, but my office computer is 2 generations out of date. Not acceptable anymore. Any fans of Xbox here may not understand that the sophistication of the business intelligence that's built into many of the current programs today is significantly more advanced than any deployment of BI in any corporate setting. For those of us who struggle with helping organizations advance their technology, it's amazing how much business intelligence today is still done in Excel, based on information that's coming out in paper format from canned reports where the data is more than 3 months old. It's staggering. But yet my 14-year-old son is playing Xbox on a program live with people from around the world, and the information is refreshing instantaneously. It's phenomenal. As a society, however, the problem is that when we bring our apps to work, we expect the corporate IT department to somehow support them. We also expect the CIO to maintain security, confidentiality, protect our corporate data. Who remembers the hacking of Sony over the summer and how outraged we were when our personal information is all of a sudden divulged? Who remembers the latest hacking into a medical record that happened in Saskatchewan early this spring? So we don't want to have our corporate information, our personal information, in any way breached, and we will blame the CIO immediately if that happens. Many of the devices that are coming into the workplace today are still what I would call ghost IT. The systems are not secure, they're not protected, they don't have any way of managing or refreshing or making secure the kind of data that we're capturing on those devices. Protection of customer information, intellectual property, trade secrets, personal health information, these are all threats in a corporate world. And we have an install base of corporate apps with trillions of terabytes of data that we have to protect. Corporations need to balance the attractive features of consumer technology with the legitimate business requirements of protecting their corporate assets. Somebody said that God invented the world in 7 days. But the problem was he didn't have an install base to worry about. Many corporations are trying to deal with this phenomenon. Some of them have embraced bring your own device or bring your own app. Those that are leading edge and who have embraced this are doing it in a way that's meeting their consumer demand, their employee demand, but doing it in a responsible way. Who remembers the early days of the BlackBerry? It was terrific, right? The coolest thing about the BlackBerry when it was deployed was that there was an enterprise server edition of the BlackBerry so that IT could responsibly deploy the technology in a way that protected the corporate back end. It's still possible today with all of our new generation of devices. Many of them offer PKI authentication, biometric, remote swiping, strong password controls, and access capabilities. The thing is, corporate CIOs have the capability to embrace consumer and to bring your own device, and they have the tools to do it in a responsible way without making it kind of bad old IT. In April of this year, Boston Medical teamed up with their network provider to support a bring your own device to work. They did so by deploying some technologies like Citrix, for example, that will allow access to corporate applications and still allow the user to use their device for business or personal reasons. The CIO, in fact, has claimed that the initiative was so successful that IT is now cool again in that organization. So the corporate IT problem is one where if you put your head in the sand and ignore it, ghost IT will be alive and well. In fact, it is today. For those CIOs who have embraced it, who have actually launched formal programs, policies, and procedures, those opportunities in those organizations have become very successful. Technologies exist in the back office to protect these devices, protect corporate data, and yet allow the user the flexibility to bring all sorts of devices to the workplace. Smart companies are embracing this, but they have to find a balance between flexibility and the sort of sexiness of these devices and the protection of intellectual property and corporate assets, which are the lifeblood of any organization. This is a fundamental shift for corporate IT, and I believe a defining moment for corporate IT. And those who embrace it will be considered thought leaders. There's also a significant innovation opportunity for wise companies to be able to take these devices and use them in a way profoundly unheard of in the past. Our company, for example, 5-6 months ago, launched apps for all of our major corporate applications, so our smartphones can use them. In our world, it was being responsible. In our world, we're being proactive in doing so. And the customers and the clients that we deal with, at least those who believe they want to be ahead of the curve, are embracing those steps as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Dennis has taken my bio of Daniel, so I'm going to do this from memory, and we'll go from there. But Daniel Kloss is a venture capitalist with Kloss Capital, which is easy to remember. Kloss with a K, that's also his name. He spent 10 years in various investment banking roles and brings that perspective to the panel. He doesn't have prepared remarks for us, but he's going to join us on the panel. And so I'm going to start the panel with some questions that I've prepared. We'll talk for 5 or 10 minutes, get a sort of see where that takes us, and then I'll invite questions from the floor. There are microphones positioned around the room, so if you are going to ask a question from the floor, I'd appreciate it if you would step up to one of those and use it, because we are both recording this for posterity and also broadcasting it on the web. So that will make sure that all 6 people at home watching us will hear your questions. So bear with me, and I'll just take a seat, and we'll get the panel started. So we described in the course of each of your topics a bunch of big forces that are driving consumerization of IT. Sort of some long-term trends that are making this happen. And I wondered if I could get each of you in turn to give me just a sense of which of these forces, whether it's the smartphone and the tablet, sort of the dethroning of the PC as the device, social entering the enterprise, that social layer, the things moving to the cloud, IT losing its monopoly of control. Sort of which of those things do you think will have the biggest impact on the enterprise in the short term? What do you think is the one to be most excited about or most worried about, depending on your perspective? And maybe we'll start with you, Daniel.
Sure. Good morning. I think they all come together. So I look at the IT department, and I think they're going to be, they're changing their roles from building technology to really evaluating technology. So in my view, the biggest thing going forward is you look at all these systems, and there's all these different, you look at Ripple, and you can name 3 or 4 other systems like it. And so when you look at it, I think you've got all these disparate systems out there, and the IT department's really going to have to evaluate it and bring it all together and create this platform and get people using it, because you're going to have all these people using different systems in silos. For example, I look at my portfolio companies like Firmex, and you do find champions within organizations. So Ripple will go to an organization and find a champion inside an organization to use the product. But without the real corporate buy-in, and I'm sure that's why they're going after the small to medium-sized market, without the corporate buy-in, you're not going to get everyone using the same system on the same platform. So I think you're going to have all these systems starting to merge, and you're going to have platforms like Salesforce putting them through their system, and at least the corporate and the IT department really pushing and getting corporate buy-in overall.
Dennis, can you give me your thoughts about?
Certainly from a technology adoption perspective, the tablet, the iPad has really pushed the envelope, because while the phone has been an interesting addition to the equation, I think the tablet is real productivity and real capability of productivity. And folks like doctors are using these technologies in a way like they would never ever done before. And so IT has to understand that there is real data being used and stored and created in those devices, that they have to be embraced, and the architecture of the organization has to catch up in order to be able to make those an efficient and effective and a highly productive tool, because it's only going to get better, as they say.
Gotcha. David?
Yeah, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. A lot of the motivation that we see is generational. So you have a lot of young people entering the workforce. I think the statistic is, in 5 years, Gen Ys are going to be 50% of the workforce. And the idea is that generationally people think differently. So as a Gen Y, I have a different view of what I should be able to do and the way I should be able to interact and how I operate within a work environment. And so that influences the tools I bring and the way I communicate. And so that's actually driving, a lot of kind of the motivations on our client side. And what's interesting is, there's kind of two flavors of clients that we see. They're either kind of clients that are 50, 200 people that have never done anything in our space before. They've never done a performance review or something like that, and they want to do something, but they know if they do the traditional thing, their people are going to just throw up all over it, and it's never going to work in their culture. The other kind of flavor is people who have kind of done the old way, and the masses have spoken, and people kind of don't like that. So I think the generational factors is kind of a key thing influencing the workforce and the consumerization. The other interesting data point I'll give you is that our target market, as I mentioned, is kind of like that 0 to 1,000 employees, because they have the demographic typically that support our kind of solution. They can make decisions really easily and not be encumbered by complex IT requirements, even though we do see that. But on the flip side, we do see now a lot of larger companies, and I'll kind of point to some of the kind of the larger kind of the big 5 consulting firms who hire young people to do the work, right? They're the ones that go out and they do the audits and they do the heavy lifting. And so whether them as an organization like it or not, they're having to respond to these generational desires. So we definitely see that as a huge driver.
Great. Nigel, you study these trends for a living. Tell us which ones do you think have the most sort of short-term impact, and also be curious as well what you think 5 years from now, which one are we going to reflect 10 years from now, which one are we going to reflect on and say, this is the one that surprised us, that we thought this was, it sort of trickled along and then boom, all of a sudden, like the iPad in the medical space that just has sort of arrived, and feels like it was yesterday, before iPad and after iPad kind of in the healthcare space. Tell us about which one of those is going to surprise us.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things in the short term that's huge is cloud. And so while it looked like the pure revenue numbers didn't look that high, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is obviously cloud companies don't take the money up front. If you think about the SAP, huge capital cost up front and then maintenance over time. So it understates the true impact even in the next 18 months. Big installations for applications are pretty much, you think about CRM is probably once every 6-7 years, I think it is. ERP installs once every 8 to 10. That's like once in a CIO's lifetime. But each one of those is now being competed for. And the breakdown in the big old school vendors' suites, the functionality that's missing, people are looking at and bringing it into their organizations through cloud computing. And so I think short-term cloud is huge. It's a huge factor for how companies are rethinking their architecture. And that's going to have long-term repercussions, which leads to my long-term favorite, which would be, if I had to choose, I think to be honest, to your point, I think they work way better together. Cloud and mobile works extremely well together, and social couldn't be social without cloud. But if I had to isolate one of them for the long-term change, it would be mobile. And I think it's so early days right now, but if you look at the possibilities for mobile devices and how it can change what organizations do, what people in the field do, what you require for training, augmented reality, near-field communications, all these are going to be part of the devices we just take for granted in a matter of 36 to 48 months. And so when you think about how you can reorganize what your business does, break down the silos, change the roles of people in the field, all those are going to be capable partially because of the devices that people just take for granted, stick in their pocket, and go. And so the cloud becomes an enabling factor for why you would mobilize your workforce. So if I had to throw down a bet on the table.
Fair enough. We talked a couple of times during the opening remarks, and it's come up already on the panel, sort of the focus on the mid-market or on the smaller kind of companies being where this kind of change seems to get traction first. And is that part of your investment thesis? Are you targeting sort of companies that are aimed at that mid-market or aimed above, and why? Can you give us a sense of, is it the mid-market where this is really gaining momentum, and some thoughts about why that might be?
Sure. So, I don't know if my mic's working well, but it's a really tough time to be investing, and I'll tell you why. You look at the mid-market or the small to medium-sized market, and they're adopting technology quicker, but they're adopting it with this freemium model. So you're looking at these companies saying, okay, you're offering the service to people for free, you're getting a certain amount of adoption, it's not necessarily rolling across, but the revenues aren't following, so you need a massive amount of capital to actually invest in these companies to really get the small to medium-sized buy-in, right? So you look at that side, you're getting the adoption. On the other side, when you're dealing with the banks, because there are a whole bunch of companies in Toronto that focus on the banks and the insurance sector, and they're getting the buy-in of the big corporate side of the IT department. The revenues are there, but the sales cycle is so long. So what do you really invest in? And the problem with investing in the small to medium-sized guys like Ripple, for example, is you need massive amounts of capital. And if you look at the venture capital space today, there isn't a massive amount of capital. If anything, it's going down and down. And so it's really challenging. The one thing I'd just quickly say is technology is becoming so cheap and so easy to build, so your barrier to entry is so low. So someone will come into my office and they'll say, oh, we could build that in 3 to 4 months. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, if you can build in 3 to 4 months, you're going to have so much competition. So you're going to see a ton of competition in that small to medium sized space. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm looking for really niche applications.
So you mentioned that freemium model in the course of the discussion. And that's one of those trends that, depending on who I speak to, about this topic, is one that people have opinions that it might be one that fizzles in the enterprise. That it might not be the way enterprise buys this stuff. And I'd be interested, David, you've placed a big bet on that space, and Dennis, you advise some companies on that. So maybe David, you give me the sort of pro case for why freemium works, so well in that space, and Dennis, perhaps why it's an issue afterwards for the enterprise that these things enter so cheaply.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so, people who describe freemium, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, freemium in our mind is not a business model. It's a lead generation model. So the idea is that if people need to use your product, get your hand on the product, you need to find a champion in the organization, a coach, someone who's going to use your stuff. You have to lower the barrier and make it easy. So the nice thing about what we do is that we actually don't do much in the way of outbound marketing. We don't do cold calling. We don't do any kind of proactive selling. What we do is we have a freemium product, meaning people can get started for free. They can sign up. And for us, that acts as a lead generation tool. So we'll reach out to people who sign up for the free version of our product. We'll reach out to their executives, in certain cases, and we kind of build that groundswell. Someone reaching out in a company and signing up for your product is a signal that there's interest, right? Doesn't mean that everyone's going to buy, but there's interest. So I think the key is, number one, it's a lead generation model.
Well, given that that's so easy to adopt it, you wind up, Dennis, I'm sure you've seen this problem with 60 of these. I picked Ripple, somebody else picked something else to do something not exactly the same, but similar enough, and we end up with 60 of these in our enterprise. And how does the CIO adjudicate? How do we decide what's corporate standard, what we're going to double down on?
So to combine a couple of the questions, one of the biggest trends that's happening in corporate is the notion that the business owner is driving IT decisions, not the CIO. And so, whether it's manufacturing or retail or wholesale or government, it's the ones that need the IT are the ones that are going and finding it. And their shackles have come off in many ways because of these business models to adopt new and innovative ways of doing things. But they're not becoming corporate standards, right? They're being used in X department or Y department or Z department. So that's the sort of entry barrier. What's really taking hold, however, is that in corporations where the core of the business is innovating itself, then they are finding IT solutions. And with the advent of cloud, they don't really need IT to support them. So I'll take retail, for example. One of the biggest trends in North American retail today is localizing the service offering or the product offering that traditionally has been a cookie-cutter chain approach. So you take a Sears or a Walmart or a big pharma company, what they're offering in the local market may be different than in the market 200 miles away. And it's that localization that's really becoming appealing to customers. Well, that ability to do that is coming from the advent of business intelligence, which is being procured from specialized companies outside of IT, because IT is still running green screen, right? So there's really innovation happening on the business end from the business side who needs to innovate their business and respond to market challenges by procuring from cloud-based service companies who have truly innovative products to sell. And IT is struggling with it because they're not sure what to do about it.
Daniel, you mentioned the sort of the integration of these things, and it came up with you as well, Dennis, sort of how do you put them together? And Nigel and I talked about it before the panel about sort of IT goes through these oscillations from best of breed, you buy the point solution to a particular topic, you get the Ripple to solve this and an expense management application here and so on and so forth, and they're all great at their individual tasks, and then we swing the pendulum the other way and sort of we say, okay, wait, now the sort of the fashion is get them all integrated, buy one big check to Oracle, and these things sort of go back and forth. And I wonder, Nigel, whether where are we on that continuum, and how does consumerization play into that?
I'd argue that we've spent the last almost decade moving towards the one big suite, driven by the ego and strategy of Larry Ellison in part. But I mean, you look at that, and so from a corporate IT of the big end users in Canada, you look at how they're trying to move towards having, in a sense, a vision where it was easier, the one throat to choke and whatnot. But at the same time, it's breaking down at the edges because all this focus was on the middleware. How do you tie these pieces together so you can have a single view of the customer or a single view of the employee, depending on what your business role happens to be. And so what happened was all this focus on the middleware and tying the pipes together, it has distracted them from actually accomplishing anything. And so what ends up happening is you buy the niche solution in order to accomplish the goal that you actually set out to do, whether it's Ripple or what have you. And so I think we've actually kind of almost hit the end of the big suite thing, and we've moved back into proliferation of cool startups that deliver on what people actually want. And we'll probably see the next 5 years of the big vendors trying desperately to buy these startups, to add them to their portfolio, and then rewire them back in. So as you say, there is nothing new under the sun. There are new technologies, new products, but in terms of business strategies for the big vendors, they'll probably try and reconsolidate over the next 4 or 5 years. But we see a big wave of these startups meeting the needs of real users.
Daniel, is that what you see in terms of the startups that that are coming in to pitch you? Is that the mode that they are building sort of point solutions with an eye to ultimately becoming part of a suite, or is it that we're going to start with this point solution and it's our beachhead and we're going to expand from there?
I look at my portfolio companies, and I think either people realize they're becoming a platform and they're opening up their architecture and they're allowing other people to really integrate into their solutions. So, or I'm seeing companies that go down the other spectrum and really become a niche, and I hope one day a Salesforce or someone like them will buy it. What I think that it's going to follow the consumer route. There's only so many platforms like Facebook and Twitter and so forth, and I think the same thing will happen on the enterprise side of the market as well. There'll just be so many platforms, and for example, Salesforce, I actually think they're going to stop buying all these companies because I think they're overpaying for them, and they're going to look at it and just really open things up and let you use the platform, but then basically it will look almost like an app store internally, and that's where I see things going. With one of my portfolio companies, Digital Menu Box, we started as a tool. We had the screen outside of a restaurant, then we became this enterprise solution for the restaurants where you can make your reservation systems, you can do all these different things to run your business and manage your digital marketing, and now this entrepreneur has really opened it up and let other people build for him because he's got the distribution.
The platform guys building app stores, I know you guys are, Ripple is part of the Jive app store, there's a Salesforce app store, and as you mentioned, the corporate app store as something that might be on our horizon. Perhaps give us some thoughts about that. How would I go about building one of those? Are there any examples live in the world of the corporate app store?
No, I can't say I can point to anything specifically, but I think, to sort of expand the thread a little bit, from a corporate perspective, I think those companies, those smart companies are realizing that, ERP is fairly stable. It's the add-on, or if I can use the term bolt-ons, that are becoming very attractive now. And because most of the ERPs are open, the ability with API to integrate into the corporate ERP environment is terrific today. The innovative young companies that are building these new generations of apps are building them in such a way that they can be, API'd into the big corporate environment. And I guess the second layer, those organizations that are not throwing out legacy, but are doing data aggregation in a way that's meaningful and generating meaningful business insight, are those that are really sort of leading edge in my view. I think ERP, I don't see much of a shift in ERP for the next 5, 6, 7 years. What I do see is these smart applications that are being added to the enterprise to do very specific things. And again, one of the trends that I'm very happy to see is that a lot of these young companies are very focused. They're very focused on doing what they do and not trying to do all things, but doing very specific things. And corporate business people are buying those for specific reasons. If IT is smart, and many IT leaders are finally catching on, they're integrating those in a meaningful way. And I think those are the organizations that are being quite successful.
And they're great examples. So you look at industry leaders, like I think TD is a great industry leader, and they're taking on-premise solutions and integrating them with cloud-based solutions. So you look at, I don't know, they're installing connections maybe at TD, and they'll integrate different things like Pulsestream and the Hive and tools like that, and tools like Ripple. So I think they're learning. They've got these platforms. They choose them like Jive or Connections, whatever the case is, and they start integrating these niche applications. And when they're integrated into Connections and Jive, I think corporate can really get behind it. And TD has an example of a system called the Hive or Wow Moments, where they've got all of their employees buying into it. It's an engagement tool. So I think they're integrating all these engagement tools.
And oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think the real focus is going to be on end user value, and the idea of an app store. The whole idea behind an app store is that you pick and choose what you want to use. It's not all these things are thrust upon you. And so what we're actually seeing from an integration standpoint is less of, hey, can you integrate with my ERP and my HR system, and more, can you help my people get the work done that they need to do without having to go to all sorts of places. Interestingly, so one of the kind of the big consulting firms that we were working with, they said, hey, we got tens of thousands of people. We want to start with kind of the small group. And so what we need to think about is how this is going to integrate with like our LMS and our e-learning. And we're like, well, why? Do people use that service? Like, is that really popular? Like, no one really uses it. Well, then why is integrating with it, important? And so people are realizing that, like, what they used to do, because, they live in this integrated universe, is kind of breaking down. And the focus is, well, what, if we want people to use this, let's ask the question, do they sit in front of their Salesforce.com all day? Do they use like a Jive or a Salesforce, whatever it is? Like, let's integrate with that, because if we can help people, do that, then we're going to make their lives easier. I would also say just one thing on the flip side, which is back to, again, end user value. If I were to go around to a bunch of your companies and ask you, like, are people really, really busy? Are they focused on their work? And you would probably say yes. But if I were to walk around and take a look throughout the day and see how many people are checking their Facebook. Okay, Facebook, which is not integrated with any system they're using, right, and has maybe not a tremendous amount of specific work value, are they using it? And the answer is they probably would be. And the reason they're using it is because they see personal value in using that service. So, on the flip side of this entire integration discussion, people will use things regardless of integration, regardless of convenience, if they find personal value in it. So there's a big shift in delivering solutions that people actually want to use because they help them get their work done.
I would also say, too, that one of the coolest trends on the consumer side that needs to find its way into the corporate side is the fact that technology now is being designed in such a way that it mimics how people actually work. So if you think about corporate ERP or legacy systems, these systems were built by IT people in a very structured menu kind of way that were very difficult oftentimes to use, right? If you take a tablet, an iPad, and you take a medical record and you mimic that medical record, because doctor knows that on page 7 is where my lab results are. They're always there. They have been there for 300 years. Well, on a tablet, you can flip to page 7 with your EMR and find it. And that's how people actually work, as opposed to 3 times logging in, 4 menus deep. I might find it, or I might have to come back 3 menus.
Well, and that goes beyond that. I mean, think about where you started bringing in not just gamification, but the tools that people use for games. So, for instance, Nintendo Wii, Microsoft Kinect, you can use those gesture-based interfaces to a certain extent and bolt those on to some of the things you might want in, not necessarily today in everybody's environment, but there's no reason why you couldn't use those tools other than people feel silly or they feel self-conscious about it. There was a company I actually went to look at, and the first instance they had for how they were controlling one of the technical devices they had was actually a PS3 controller. And it was really neat. They could use all the buttons. Everyone knew exactly how to use it with minimal training. And when they went to launch this to market, basically the marketing team's like, you can't do that in enterprise. Nobody will buy that because it's the wrong type of control. So they went back to a really hideous industrial joystick. And what it then meant was people then had to train and go up to menus and tab icons and everything else. Whereas the consumerization factor was you put something in people's hands that they already know how to use, and you lower your cost for support. There's a real bottom line benefit here.
Any questions from the floor? Anyone have a question in the audience? Cognizant that we've run a little over time, so let's take some of those questions.
Okay, I want to go back to the freemium model that you're seeing. One of the observations that I've spotted is that the freemium model, when it's trying to sell into the enterprise, actually becomes what I've branded as ransomware. And basically, it's in order to lock it down for IT, you've got to pay us money. Is that a real trend, or have I just seen a quirk? And if so, is that good, or is there a better way?
Yeah, so I think it is a trend. It's interestingly, we don't see it as often because we kind of operate on two spectrums. Either there's kind of a group of people that start to use it, and it kind of remains in that group, whether it's an engineering group, support, or sales group, however. And then there's kind of the top-down approach, whereby you get people just calling you out of the blue who've never used your product, who have no expectation of using the free version at all, and deploying it. So in our experience, we've kind of seen one or the other. We actually we've never really been in the position to kind of hold people hostage per se.
Nigel, from a less specific example than just are you seeing applications where that's the case, where we get my data in it, I get my employees using it, and now oh wait a sec, my patents are on Dropbox.
Yeah.
Now what do I do? Is that a problem?
It's not just freemium. It's also, if you think about low introductory prices on cloud-based computing. I mean, one of the concerns that business and general counsel often bring to cloud-based computing, when they talk about security concerns, it's not necessarily technical security that they're necessarily worried about. It's also things along the lines of data residency, which could be the Canadian issue, but it could equally well, the problem be, how do I get back out? So vendor lock-in has been with us since the dawn of Servers Bureau or before, and this is just another wrinkle on it.
Dennis, anything to add to that topic?
Corporate IT, or I should say, the executive suite, don't believe that anything is for free, right? So there might be sort of introductory opportunities, 30-day trials, whatever, but eventually, if an application is going to be accepted and standardized, there's an expectation that it has to be paid for. There's also an expectation that it has to be corporatized, in a sense that you need the corporate version, you need to install it properly and configure it and manage the data. So I think there's a reality that is expected. Having said that, if there is a section of the enterprise that needs to try something, having that 30-day trial is not a bad idea, because you can do it, have a proper pilot project, for example, and evaluate this thing, and if it works, great, adopt it. If not, then kind of move on. So I think there's room for both models, and I think there's an expectation within the enterprise that eventually it has to be paid for.
Any other questions from the floor? Sorry.
A little taller. We have a lot of incubating companies that start in Ontario and in Canada, actually. We're actually quite good at it. And they seem to grow to about maybe $1 million to $4 or $5 million. But we don't have many that go beyond that. So I think we have a challenge in Ontario and Canada about how do we get these entrepreneurs who are selling into this industry, what are they not doing to become like a WorkBrain or to get up to that $30, $50 million mark? What could they be doing to help them get there where they're not getting there today?
Daniel, this is an important part of you being able to make a return for your limited partners. So tell me what you think do we have this problem, and what can we do about it?
Well, WorkBrain's a completely different animal, right, when you think about it, because it wasn't a cloud-based solution effectively, and you weren't selling to small to medium-sized businesses. And I just think we're really early in this whole life cycle, right? So if you look at, this summer we looked at the Canadian market, and I think we identified 50 cloud-based systems in Canada above $5 million of sales. So the market is tiny, and I think we're going to grow with the market ultimately. But I just think it's just because of the stage we are in the entire life cycle, and I'm sure if you looked in the States, it's a very similar situation.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I don't think that, companies failing to kind of get kind of critical escape velocity to get to a certain size is a Canadian-specific problem. I think that if you look at the spectrum of companies in general, like very few actually succeed to get to the $100 million and plus range. So, is there a silver bullet? Like, I think if there was, we would all want to know what it is. It takes a lot of hard work, and it just statistically, it's you zig when you should have zag. You do this versus you do that. You try to iterate as quickly as you can, but I don't think it's Canadian specific
and I'll just add to that. I think it's the wrong way to look at businesses in terms of revenues today, because a $10 million software or SaaS business with 90+% margins is similar to a $100 million manufacturing business, right? So I've got businesses that are $3 million in sales with 40 really knowledge-based employees, so it's a good-sized little business, but they're even starting to make money at that size, right? So it's hard to look at it and say the revenues of $4 or $5 million are small, because it's equivalent to a much bigger business.
It also, not only has it got better profit margins, there's the run rate effect of the software as a service business. That's sort of, to Nigel's graph, where the line starts very slow, but it's a 12-month recurring revenue business, or a 36-month lifespan of those companies, and so they tend to sort of that line begins very modestly, but then really takes off at the edge. So I think we're at the beginning of that elbow, if you will, in the curve. Another question from the floor.
Data security on the consumer devices, do you have any thoughts on how that can be managed over time?
Before I put that question on the floor, I just want to mention in our paper, the SASE Enterprise paper, there's a company called Perspexis that addresses that question specifically, that is worth reading about. But let me ask the folks here about locking data down both in the cloud and on the mobile device. Nigel, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Sure. I mean, there's always a balance between productivity on the one side and security on the other, and that's been with us, again, for a long time. If you think back to the discussion you're having about email, oh my God, people are talking to each other without memos. IAM was a huge issue. So go back to the IAM days of like 2000, 2001. In some industries, such as trading, it was a massive issue because it was so much more efficient than any other corporate IT that people jumped on IAM clients, but the trades weren't being recorded. And so that's been there for a while. And if you look now at consumer devices, in one of our most recent surveys, I think Krista Napier, who's one of our analysts, just launched a report on IDC.com that talked about what Canadian companies are looking for, and basically it came down to things like strong passwords, the ability to remote wipe. So partially it mattered what device you select, because some of those features are incumbent in the device that you actually pick. And there's a few other ones. I mean, I think you guys can probably discuss the other options there. But the actual requirements from IT in terms of what they consider to be a secure device is dramatically shrinking. It used to be all-encompassing. We needed to do X, Y, and Z, and now it's basically X or Y. And so that's a positive sign.
Yeah, I think there's really three aspects to it. So one is user behavior, right? We all lock our car doors and we lock our homes, but we don't put a password on our devices. Go figure. Hard to understand that, right? So user behavior. Secondly, the whole issue of texting and mail and things like that. There's a behavior in a corporate setting that needs to be communicated, so that people, take greater care in the kinds of things that they're moving around. From a data perspective on the device, all the devices that are sold today have very powerful data protection capability. And as long as corporate IT is allowed to, or takes the initiative to, set those up properly with PKI certificates and things like that, you won't have any worry, about your data. So user expectation, user training, user behavior, very important. Let corporate IT or have corporate IT, set the device up properly on the network. And I don't think, there's going to be an issue. I know from our perspective, we've had our corporate apps on our phones now for almost a year, and we haven't had an issue or a concern.
Another quick point that a case study reminded me of, the Ottawa Hospital, or collection of hospitals, launched iPads, and the take-up from doctors, nurses, you couldn't get them out of their hands. And so they'd actually noticed that people were taking them home, even though they were corporate devices being given to the employees. I think it's 2.5 years they've been running the pilot, they haven't lost a device. When they look at their other devices, things go missing constantly because people have no personal attachment to them. And so one of the things they've actually found is you cannot get them, even even if they just want to do an upgrade or throw something new on, they're going to do it themselves because they're worried IT will take them away. And the attachment factor of people to their devices, and the studies they've done for MRIs is, it's not an emotion like attachment. The emotion that people have to the iPad, I can see one over there, is actually closest to love, which is kind of scary in its own way, but it's also indicative that physical security is not necessarily that big a problem. The device security is actually probably better than you have on your 2-generation-old laptop. So in many ways, you're actually probably safer with one of those because God knows you're not letting it leave your possession. So you've got that going for you as well.
Well, the other thing is, on a lot of these devices, the data's not there, right?
Yeah, it's sitting in the cloud.
You're in the cloud, whereas your laptop, we all keep files on our laptops. We shouldn't, and we leave them in airports and all kinds of places.
Yeah, I was going to say that you'd be a lot more concerned if you lose a briefcase with a whole bunch of paper in it versus your laptop, right? And it's interesting. 2 or 3 years ago, you would have said the biggest concern about cloud computing was security, and that doesn't even come up at all, right? I mean, it's not even it's probably if you think about the IT department, they're concerned about maybe the processes and controls, but it's almost the last thing people ask you.
Yeah, we just helped build a hospital in the UK, and it was completely paperless. And it was a real eye-opener for me as a sort of a CIO to build this environment, because the hospital across the road has a courier service bringing paper charts back and forth all day long. So which one is a better scenario, right?
Great. Any last questions for the floor? I'm cognizant that we promised you folks that we'd get you out of here by 9:30, and we're just about on 9:30 exactly. Any last questions from anybody? Anyone online? Neha with a question? Great. Then I'd like to just thank you all for coming and attending our panel today, and to thank our panelists for their insights and contribution. I think it's a topic that, as you can see, we got sort of going here. We could have probably talked about the shifts that are underway all day, and hope you found it interesting and enlightening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.